Let me catch you up to where I am in the bedding and preparation for sampling process. First of all, I remove the action, and hammer flanges and weapon flanges have verdigris. So I treated the ones that didn't repeat properly that I wanted for samples. I raised slightly the hammers that were sitting on their cushions that I needed for samples. I took out the spring, the return spring. I scratched an arrow going up so it goes back in the same way that it came out. You can see from the overspray that was on this that this particular end favors that. When it goes back in, I'm going to square it. And before it goes back in, I'm going to dress the side of the keyframe as needed to make it flat and square. Taking this out relieves pressure and thereby friction on the two ends that are the stiffest part of the keyframe anyway. And that makes it easier to read the symptoms. I then took the same blue tape and some front rail punchings and cut the front rail punchings so there were little strips. And I tried my thickest, which I think are about 90 thousandths, at both the treble and the bass. The treble, it was too much. The bass, it was too little. And so then I tried cutting, pulling out the treble one and putting in, I think it's about 60 thousandths. And that was cut in half, and I put 60 thousandths on the one in the bass, and anyway, they fit. The other thing I did was I scraped overspray off the dowels that fit the cheek blocks so that they just drop into place. And then I tightened down the cheek blocks. I tried the front rail, it seemed fine. I then turned down the balance rail, and I started with the second to most treble glide bolt with the W&G tool. That is a gauge, and there was space at the second to most treble one. The next one was solid. I turned it with a little upright tool that is used for tapping pins. It's quite lightweight, fits over the glide bolts nicely. And anyway, I like it for this. Anyway, I turned back 2 quarter turns off, we'll call it the 1, 2, 3, 4th, the 4th glide bolt. The 5th glide bolt was still in the air when finally the 4th glide bolt was in the air. Went to the next glide bolt, it was down solid. I turned it a half step, 2 quarter turns back. Meanwhile, glide bolt 4 was now back on the keybed, and I turned it another quarter turn. And then I went to the next one, and it had a couple of half turns, and then I had to go back through these. So these were really cranked up. Eventually, the glide bolt number 5 touched back down, and I had to turn it a little bit further. Meanwhile, both the treble and the bass glide bolts were not touching down. So, clearly the force of that spring and the difficulty in testing the symptom, particularly in the Steinway style stiff key frame. It's very stiff. And unless you get the glide bolt close to the keybed, tapping it or thumping it may not give you a symptom. So that's the beauty of the WNG tool, is that just says, yes, it's moving or no. And as I'm turning it down, this little indicator goes, whoop. So the indicator in the dial indicator will travel until your back turning removes the glide bolt from the keybed. And as soon as it's removed from the keybed, of course, it will just sit there. So it's a very easy way of making sure that these are backed up. If I hadn't done that, there was a little symptom through this area in the treble on the front rail, which seemed like maybe it was lighter. It wasn't as well connected. It didn't actually produce a high-pitched tap. Well, anyway, I did that. Glide bolts, the cheek blocks are tied down. And I went to the back rail with my long screwdriver inserted between dampers, between hammers, between the keys, so that it's sitting on the cloth. And you can tell because the cloth is soft. No symptoms. So the back rail, and I went all the way through, the back rail fits nicely. It's too bad I didn't test it before I turned the glide bolts out of the way. But anyway, probably the back rail was cantilevered up against the dogs in the middle. So very important, get the glide bolts off the keybed. Now, in the case of a flexible keybed, it's a little different. You've got hidden studs that are there to position the basic height of the balance rail, and they should not be fiddled with unless it's clear that they present a problem. They should be touching down as you do the rest of the balance rail bedding. So anyway, it's a little out of order because everything checked out with the front rail and the back rail. When I had to turn these way up, I decided, okay, I'm going to check the cheek blocks. And when I checked the cheek blocks, I had confusing information. There was a shim, a factory shim, on the treble one. The bass one, there was no shim. And I pulled it out, and it was still confusing. Anyway, so what I ended up doing was I got thickness gauges. These are it's an automotive tool. And the smallest one that comes in this set is 1.5 thousandths, which is pretty thin. Anyway, there was clearly a space here at the end. No matter what I did, when it was all cranked down, there was a space. Okay, then there was no space. Then it turns out, as I've tightened both these down, there's another space. And then another. So it's touching down there, it's touching down there, it's touching down here, there's a space, touching down there, there's a space, touching there, there's a space, touching there, and then there's a pretty big space here, but it's not, but it is touching down at the end. So my just tapping on the rail, I mean, you can listen to it. I do have these key steps in here now, which makes it a little bit more awkward, but this was not noticeable when this was all up. That sound wasn't there, and so, you know, clearly it tilts the keyframe, and for whatever reason, it was eliminating that knob. That is the only clear indication of space in the front rail, but it's, there we go. But it's an important one. So it looks like I have to bed the front rail, and I'm going to do that by judiciously removing material with a sanding block from the areas in between my spaces until I've eliminated the spaces. And probably these little guys, I think these two are caused by those way turned up glide bolts scraping, maybe, you know, it pressing on the way out, but scraping on the way in. And so they've made a little channel there. They're not very wide. They're about the width of a glide bolt. Not great, but so I'm not going to try and eliminate them. I'll be a week of sanding, and it's very hard to go that far carefully. And also there's a little lip on the front rail, and I'll lose the lip, and then I've got to sand the whole front rail. So probably, and there's another one here. So there are 3 glide bolts that were the egregiously turned up, and they each have a space on the front rail. There's one, and it's, you know, it's quite free. There's the next one. And of course, just for the camera, I won't be able to find where that is. My eyes aren't good enough. There it is. So anyway, I'll taper the ends to eliminate these little bits, and particularly this one where it will cause some noise, and then I will bed the balance rail. And when I do that, I will not use pedals, because it's going out to a setup on the bench that it doesn't have pedals. But when it comes back to the piano for the final fitting, the final bedding, I will engage pedals, because there's a lot of leverage there. And please like, subscribe, or follow the link in the notes to my website.